Hashem, Baruch Hashem. Today's Daf Yomi is Menachos Tzadi Aleph, Menachos 91, and we're going to start we're in the middle of a brisa that's discussing how do we know that all the karbanos have nesachim, with the exception of 5 different karbanos that don't have the nesachim accompanying them. So we're in brisa. The Gemara is talking about how do we know that the karban toda, the Thanksgiving offering, how do we know that korban requires nesachim? So that's where we're up to 6 lines from the top on 91a. 7 lines from the top. So Amar Mar Toda Minayin. How do we know that the korban toda requires nesachim? Tam Omar O Zevach. So it says or a zevach. The extra word or tells us that the toda requires nesachim. Gemara says Atu Toda Lav Zevachu. What are you talking about? The toda is included in the zevach. The word zevach necessarily includes a toda. So the Gemara says, no, it's just. Well, I'll tell you why we need it. You might have thought, since the korban toda has bread accompanying it, because it has 40 loaves of bread, 4 different types, each one has 10 loaves, you might have thought, since it has bread accompanying it, then maybe it shouldn't require the nesachim. And so therefore we need the word O to teach us that the Toda requires nesachim. Mara says, me'el nazir. So why is the Toda different from the ram of the Nazir? The Nazir has 20 loaves of bread. Well, the Nazir has bread accompanying it, and it requires nesachim without an extra word of O. Mara says, no, you might have thought, awesome, shnei minin. There's only 2 different types of loaves, 20 loaves, but 2 different types. So therefore, for sure, requires an nesachim. But here by the Toda, arba meaning there are 4 different types of loaves. You might have thought it doesn't require the nesachim. Kamash one it does. Gemara says, "V'lichtov rachmana." Going back to the psukim that we're darshaning, the same pasuk, it says, "Vasita mishel Hashem." You should make an offering to God, olah zevach, an or zevach, a following neder, to bring a vow or onedava. So Gemara says, "Lichtov rachmana," following neder or nadava. The Torah could have just said, if you do a vow, a neder or nadava, lo by ola. Why does the pasuk need to say in that pasuk, "Vasita mishel Hashem ola o zevach," following neder or nadava? If it says the following neder or nadava, it shouldn't have to mention ola. We should know that typically speaking, that this would include an ola. So the Gemara says, Rahmana ola. If the Torah hadn't written the word ola, avamina, I would have said vasitam ishela Hashem. When it says at the beginning of the pasuk, you should make an offering to God. That's a call. That's a general rule. But following neder or nadava, to do a neder or nadava, voluntary offering, that's a prat. That's a specific. And then it says offering to Hashem. Chazar klal. That's a general rule. And then we have a principle of klal prat to klal. We have a general followed by specific followed by general. Yatadan elok ina prat. That has to be something similar to the prat. Ma prat mefurish. Just like the prat is something specific. Davar she'enu ba'al chet. It's something that doesn't come for a sin, like a neder and a davar. Avkol she'en ba'al chet. Also, anything that doesn't come for a sin requires nesachim. Otzi chatas va'asham shein ban al chet, and I'll exclude from a nesachim chatas and asham which come for a sin. Avi bechor meiser pesach shein ban al chet. I might think that I should also include in nesachim the firstborn, the meiser, and the pesach because they don't come for a sin. Tamomar ola. The word ola is telling us that they do not get nesachim. That the bechor meiser pesach do not get nesachim. So the Gemara says, well, okay, let's go back to your point. Ola. Well, now that the pasuk does say the word ola, that's a klal uprat marabas base. So this klal uprat with the ola and the specific, what's it coming to include? Ma prat mefurish eno mechuyev omed. So isn't the prat telling us that the vow, they're not something that you're commanded to do? You voluntarily accept upon yourself. So ma prat mefurish she'eno mechuyev omed. I've called she'eno mechuyev omed. Also, anything that is not commanded is obligated to have nisachim. Wahavi vados kachim t'mirasan. It's coming to include that the offspring of kachim and their tmura require nesachim. V'oa ba min hamosros, and an oa that comes from the mosros, which we're discussing, an extra carbon. In those cases, that they would require that they would require nesachim. So the Gemara says, "V'hasa da'amris o l'drasha." So now that we said this general principle that the word "o" is teaching us excuse me, and also all the carbonos that were slaughtered without the proper intent. So in all these cases, we're going to say that they all require nesachim, even though they're not fulfilling the owner's obligation. So now the Gemara says, "Hashadamers o adrasha." Now that we've established that when the word "o" appears in the Torah, it's coming to be used as a drasha. If that's the case, the following neder on a dava. So what is what's the word "o" coming to teach us in the case of a following neder or nedava? So the Gemara says, it's coming to teach us the following. I might thought until you bring both a neder and a nedava, you wouldn't require nesachim. Meaning, if you just brought a neder or a nedava, you require nesachim. You wouldn't require. But if only when you bring a neder and a nedava. Kamash one the I see neder chude l'bay nesachim. The I see nedava chude l'ay nesachim. So it teaches us that if you bring either one of them, you're going to require nesachim. Gemara says, "Hanichol Rabbi Oshaya." This only works well according to the position of Rabbi Oshaya, who says that you need a pasuk to separate two items that otherwise you would think that they're together. El Rabbi Yonasan Lamli, but according to Rabbi Yonasan, we assume that everything is separate in the Torah. So therefore, why do you need the word "o" according to Rabbi Yonasan? So the Gemara says, I see neder chude libayi nisachim. I might have thought that if he brought the neder by itself, it requires nisachim. I see nedava chude libayi nisachim. That if nedava by itself requires nisachim, but I see neder and nedava to still give a nisachim dechad. But if you bring a neder and a nedava, then you just need one nisachim. Kamash Milan, you need both. Gemara says, okay, fine. Oben moadechem, when it says in the pasuk, oben moadechem lamali, what's that coming to teach us? You might have thought, that when do you require nesachim for each one? When the ola is brought as a neder and the shlamim is brought as a nedava, or inami, or it's the opposite. But if their ola and the shlamim are both a neder, or inami ola shlamim ben nedava, or if they're both a nedava, shem neder achad, v'shem nedava achati. I might have thought that it's one neder and it's one nedava, and so therefore you only require one nesachim. So the word "o" teaches us that's not the case. The says, "Ben bakar ola zevach." Why does it say "Ben bakar ola o zevach"? What do we learn from the words "o zevach"? It's just again we need it. So you might have thought, I might have thought that's only the case where you bring an "o" and a shlamim as a neder, or inami "o" shlamim ben nedava. I might have thought that you bring the sachem when you bring an oah shlamim as a neder or an oah shlamim as a dava, but but where you brought two oahs, one is a neder, one is a dava. Or if you brought two shlamim, one is a neder, one is a dava. I might have thought there's one nesachem because it's one shlamim and it's one oah. But and you only require one nesachem. Kamash Malon, we don't say that. Gemara continues. The following neder, oh shlamim. What did it say? The following neder, oh shlamim. Why do we need that? Again, the Gemara says, you might have thought, I might have thought that this is the case, that you have two separate nesachim. If one is If there are two oos, one is in neder, one is in dava. Inami shnei shamim, chad b'neder, chad b'nedava. Avohecha, but in the case the kamaisi shtei oos b'neder, or shtei oos b'nedava, but where he brought two oos as a neder, or two oos in dava, inami shnei shamim b'neder, or shnei shamim b'nedava, or two shamim as a neder and two shamim as a nedava, shem oa echadu, v'shem neder echadu. I might have thought that it's one oa and it's one neder. And it would be okay to have one nesachim. Kamashma, we don't say that. Rabbi Oshaya, what is Rabbi Oshaya who says? Remember, we said that Rabbi Oshaya says that we don't need a pasuk to separate between the two items. What does he do from the fact that it says mina bakar minatzon? When it says sakatay lechamina, hani mili betray mina, you might have thought that that's only if it's two different types of animals. But if it's one type of animal, you'd be only requiring one nesachim. Kamashma, we don't say that. Then the Gemara says, why do I need the pasuk to tell us what's that coming to? You might have thought that when do you require separate nesachim? If they're sanctified one after the other, but if you sanctify at the same time, I might have thought that one nesachim is sufficient. Kamashma, we don't say that. So now we go back to our Mishnah, and our Mishnah said that the chatos of the mitzora and the asham, that the chatos and the asham don't, generally speaking, require nesachim, but the chatos of the mitzora and the asham of the mitzora require nesachim. Menani mil. So the Gemara says, how do we know that? The Tanur Rabbanan, it says in the pasuk, about the mitzora's korbanos that he brings. It says, you have to bring a flour offering of 3 esronim. And the mincha the Torah is talking about the mincha that comes along with the sacrifice, the nesachim, and there are 3 korbanos that the mitzvah brings. Chatas and asham and oah, and he has a mincha that accompanies it as of a nesachim. So therefore, he has 3 isaron for the 3 flowers. So one for the oah, one for the chatas, and one for the asham. So that's how we know that the chatas and the asham and the mitzvah require a nesachim. So the Gemara says that Omer b'mincha b'ma zevach. But maybe that in addition to this, in addition to the 3 karbanos, he has to bring his own karban mincha. When it says that the Kohen shall bring the oah and the mincha, that's referring to the mincha that comes along with the zevach, the mincha that's attached to the oah. I still don't know that we know that it requires a mincha, but we still don't know if it requires a wine libation, because the mincha, the nesachim is the flour and the oil, flour mixed with the oil, and also the wine. So how do we know it requires the wine? So that's what the pasuk says. And that teaches about the oah, the chatas, and the asha. Typically, travam is zevach. But why can't we learn out both the chatos and the asham from the word zevach and not from the word oh? Gemara says amar chatos v'asham and tam omer zevach. Like we say elsewhere, that in a separate law that you could throw the hair. The nazir has to put his hair underneath the pod, underneath the chatos or the asham, and not to shlomim. He's fulfilled his obligation. You learned it out from the word zevach. So why don't we say that here? Gemara says no. That works only where they're both for the same purpose. Where the hair of both the hair, the Nazir Torah's chatas and Nazir Torah's asham are both to allow him to be permitted. So therefore the asham is to allow him to start anew, and the chatas also is allow him to drink wine. So therefore the word zevach is good. But where the asham is to permit and the chatas is to be mechaper, like in our case, in the case of the mitzora, the asham serves to allow him to enter the camp, and the chatas is to atone for his sins. So therefore, ba'ina and treikrai, we need 2 psukim. So now the Gemara tells us, it says in the pasuk zevach zu chatas mitzora. It says zevach that refers to the chatas of the Torah. Ema zu chatas v'asham the nazir. Why do we say it refers to the mitzora? Maybe it refers to the nazir, and maybe telling us that the chatas and the asham of the nazir is what requires Nisachim. Gemara says, "Lo sakadai." Don't say that. Tanya umin chasam v'niskehem. Says min chasam v'niskehem by the nazir. Bo'aso b'shlama v'akasim v'daber. It's referring to the O and the shlamim. I thought so. Therefore, not the chatos and the asham. Gemara says, "I don't remember also the shlamim. Maybe it even refers to the chatos. Tamomer, but the ayah says devach shlamim umin chaso v'nisko." So we have another pasuk. Ayal b'kol hayav v'lama yata. Why did the ayal leave the general rule? Akeshalav to compare it. Ma ayal miuchad ba neder unadava. I've called ba beneder unadava. So also anything that comes with a voluntary offering requires nesachim, and that excludes the chatzos and asham and nazir because they're never brought as a neder unadava. Okay, so now we say oah. Do oah mitzvah. When it says oah, the Bryce said this refers to the oah of the Torah. Ve'emazu oah stiledus. Same as the oah of the oledus. Amar Abaye. We're not going to say that. Oah stiledus misefer the kranach. We learn out from the end of the pasuk. Tanya Rabbi Nasan Omer alakevas do oah stiledus. Ha'echad the word keves refers to the O of the Yoledis, and the echad refers to the 11th of the meister, that if he mistakenly called the 11th animal the 10th, it's shekar shalom. Shalom atzina b'kol Torah. You never find anywhere else in the Torah tafel chamer min ha'ikr, because you never find anywhere else in the Torah that extra is more severe than the main one, and so therefore. We would think that a meiser offering doesn't require nesachim because we learned it from the 11th animal. So if the meiser doesn't require it, for sure the 11th doesn't require it. So therefore, it's teaching us, the word achad is teaching us that it does require the nesachim. Rava Amar Ezu Davar Shetzarach Shalosha Ribuyin. What is something that requires 3 ribuyin? Avi Omer Zu Mitzorah, that this is the Mitzorah. And that's how we know it, because the Mitzorah has to bring a chatas and asham and oah. So then the Gemara says, why do we need to state for an ayol? We know that it requires a salm. This includes the ayol of Aaron on Yom Kippur. So says the Gemara, so ayol shel Aaron bin boadechem nafka. Why don't we learn that from the general pasuk of boadechem? You might have thought that's only communal offerings required in Nesachim on the holidays, but not the individual ones. So we're going to say, no, we don't say that. But why is it different than the O of the Oedis? So Sakadai Techamina, that this applies only to something that doesn't have a fixed time of Davar Shekavua Zman Imalo. You might have thought that doesn't require because the fixed time, Kamash one, that it also requires Nesachim. O Ayol Emily. What do we learn out from O Ayol? Where it tells us Larabos is a palgas. It tells us a palgas. A palgas is a sheep in the 13th month. So it's not a kaves and it's not an ayol yet. It's in between. And so therefore it's telling us that it requires Nesachim. The Gemara says, we need a pasuk to tell us that. Oh, ayol, that it requires Nesachim. Rabbi Yochanan Damar Biryo. It makes sense according to Rabbi Yochanan, says it's own separate creatures. It's not Nikrivo. If he brought a palgas, maybe I'll have Niskei ayol. He brings in a Nesachim. But it doesn't count as his carbon. It doesn't work. But he has to bring the Nesachim with him. Rabbi Yochanan, ayol, Rabbi says the palgas. Rabbi Yochanan says, when it says ayol, tell us that the palgas requires the nesachim of a ram and not a keves. So Ela Bar Pada, but according to Bar Pada, the Amar Maisi Umasni the Sveiku, that he bring it and you make a stipulation because we're not sure which it is. It's your kral or bliye Sveiku. We need the word O to add a doubt. We know the Torah doesn't have a doubt. The doubt is from us. The Torah wouldn't have mentioned it as a doubt. So the Gemara says, Vade Bar Pada Kasha. So yeah, Bar Pada would have a difficulty what O is coming to include. What is Lashora Achad Matam Omer? So what do we do with that? We know the Torah draws a distinction in the Nesachim of the ram and the Nesachim of the sheep. I might think it also draws a distinction between the Niskei Par and Egel. Tam Omer Lashora Achad. O ayo matam omer. What's it teaching us? O ayo. We know the Torah draws the distinction between the Nesachim of 1-year-old and 2-year-old. I think there's also a distinction between 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. So Tamom or O Ayo Echad. Ola Seba Kvasim Tamom. When we learn out from Ola Seba Kvasim, Fish Matzir Shachil Kakos Ben Niske Keves and Niske Ayo. You know the Torah draws the distinction between the Nesachim of the sheep and the ram. I might think there's also a distinction between a male sheep and a female lamb of 1-year-old and a female lamb of ram in its 2nd year. So we said Tamomer Oasebek Fasim, teaching us that the Nesachim are the same for a female sheep, even if it's 1-year-old or 2-year-old. Obaizim Tamomer. What do we learn out from Obaizim? Another Torah draws the distinction between the Nesachim of the Keves and the Ayel. I might think they draw a distinction also between the Gedi and the Seir, the kid and an older goat. Tamom or Obaizim. Amar Papa Badikon Rava. Rava challenged us on top of Tzadi base. Niske Racho Bekama, that a female, a baby sheep, a baby female, how much is it? And I answered him from the Mishnah at Shkolim, which mentions Gidim Mishamesh Niskate Tzon, that the kid serves. They used to give out tickets. You would pay the money, and they would give you a ticket for the Nesachim, the proper Nesachim, like a voucher. And there were 4 different ones that they would give out in the base of Mikdash. And if you gave the money for, and you got the voucher for a gedi, for a baby goat, that was an nesachim of anything from anyone purchasing from any of the goat or the sheep families except for the ram. Shal gedolim, shal katanim, shal zcharim, shal mekevas, chutz mishal elam. So we see from here that the female lamb has the same amount as every other sheep or goat except for the ayil. So there's no difference between the nesachim of older female sheep and those of the younger sheep. Okay, I apologize if it wasn't as clear as it should be, but that's because I'm a little tired. But Baruch Hashem, we did a daf for today. Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem.